Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a lot to cover. I hope everybody had a great weekend, had a great Father's Day if you were celebrating, but we do have a lot to go over. Game 5's were forced in both the NBA and the NHL. We're going to go over how that happened, everything that went on with the games, and what we're looking for as Game 5 for the NBA is tonight. Game 5 for the NHL is tomorrow. So we'll go over a little bit of those. We'll also talk a little bit about finals MVP odds for the NBA. It's been kind of a weird series for that. There's no true overwhelming favorite right now. It's kind of up in the air of who's going to win finals MVP. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the second segment. In the third segment, that's where we'll cover the NHL. In the fourth and fifth segment, we're going to talk a little bit about baseball. If you are paying attention to baseball standings right now, in the NL especially, and a little bit in the AL, but especially in the NL, there are a lot of teams that are kind of grouped very tightly together. And that is culminating in what is looking to be a very, very interesting NL MVP race, not MVP, wildcard race, excuse me. So we will talk all about that in segment 4, as there are 7 teams within 1.5 games of that third wildcard spot. And then we'll close out our show talking a little bit about the Dodgers. They had a couple of unfortunate major injuries over the weekend, one to Mookie Betts, one to Yoshinobu Yamamoto. We will talk a little bit about how that affects the Dodgers in the future and everything else with the NL and the NL West specifically. But we're going to start off our show in the NBA today, talking a little bit about Game 4 of the NBA Finals. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. Like I was saying, though, we are going to start off our show today, though, in the NBA. And we've talked a lot about this series so far. You know, we've gone from, oh, this is going to be a tight series, to, oh, this is going to be a sweep, to where we're at now. Game 3, the Celtics are up 3-0. The Mavericks are having their best player, Luka Doncic, questions, which is something that I did not expect to happen heading into this series. That was not on my bingo card, at least. But, you know, we head into Game 4, backs against the wall. They don't want to get swept. The Celtics are a great team. They're down one of their more dominant players, at least in the finals, in Kristaps Porzingis. And all the momentum is on their side. And yet, in Game 4, the Mavericks win, and they don't just win. They win by 38 points. And to put this into perspective for all of you guys, 38 points is a blowout. 38 points in the NBA Finals is the third biggest win margin in the history of the NBA Finals. Only the Celtics beating the 08 Lakers and the 90s Bulls taking out the Pacers had a higher win margin. So 38 points is ridiculous. This is a huge, huge momentum shift in this series. And momentum is a huge thing in the game of basketball. It was something that the Mavericks were out of, especially after Luka fouls out in Game 3. They're able to come out and dominate this game straight up, every single part of it. Luka and Kyrie combined to score more points than the entirety of the Celtics for the whole first half. That is not a normal thing that is supposed to happen. Luka and Kyrie are great, and they have the ability to do that, but the Celtics, the way that they've been playing, the way that they've been dominating this series, and you can make the argument that this series should be closer than it is. 3-1, 3-0 comeback has never happened in the history of the NBA. 157 times this has happened. 157 times the team down 3-0 has lost. But the Mavericks have a little bit of hope left, and hope is a dangerous thing in sports. It's what, as if you were a team that's trying to close out, it's a dangerous thing, right? Because these teams, they play with everything they have. They got nothing to lose, right? They lose, they're done. These teams with the lead, they lose, they get another chance. The Celtics have 4 shots to win 1 game. The Mavericks, on the other hand, cannot lose for the rest of the season. Otherwise, it is done. This is a point where we get to see, are the Celtics able to clutch up? Are the Celtics able to make those moves? Are they able to lock in and be that great team that we know they are? They haven't really dealt with a fully healthy team with nothing to lose yet, right? When we look at what their playoff run has been, we talk about they were up 3, they took care of business against the Heat, without Jimmy Butler. They took care of business against the Donovan Mitchell-less Cleveland Cavaliers. They took care of business against the Tyrese Halliburton-less Indiana Pacers. And now they go up against this team, this Luka Doncic-led team, and they seem to have figured something out. But then in Game 4, the Mavericks come out with a different level of energy and passion than they've played with this entire series. And this is the kind of energy that we know they have the ability to play with, right? We've seen the Mavericks play with this kind of energy, play with this kind of passion throughout the first couple rounds of the playoffs, getting them to this moment. Round 1, round 2, round 3, round 2 and 3 especially against the Thunder and the Timberwolves. We've seen the Mavericks play with this kind of defensive effort and energy, especially against those Timberwolves. They were heavily favored to lose those series, and in clutch time down the stretch, they were able to put pressure on Anthony Edwards, not let him get to his spots, play defense, play good perimeter defense, attack the way they wanted, and I think a lot of that has to do with, matchup is obviously a big part of it, and I think the Celtics aren't a great matchup for the Mavericks, but not having Kristaps Porzingis in there is huge for their game plan, right? You have a team that loves to attack the centers down low. But when they're able to stretch the floor, when they're able to cover all these positions, it's hard to run that pick and roll action and attack that center, that low guy that doesn't have that kind of athleticism as like a Rudy Gobert might have. But with Al Horford down there, and again, nothing against Al Horford, what he's been able to do this finals as a 38-year-old player. Again, 38 years old, Al Horford is playing some really good basketball. Now, it gets to the point where he can't play 30 minutes a game, but you shouldn't expect a 38-year-old Al Horford to play 30 minutes per game, right? That is kind of an unreasonable expectation for you to have if you are watching this series from a Celtics fan point of view, from really any point of view. You shouldn't expect Al Horford to play 30 minutes of great basketball at 38 years old, but he's giving you 25 minutes of really quality basketball, really good defensive basketball. He's able to switch onto guys like Luka, make that pick and roll a lot harder to deal with. He's been able to keep up with him. Luka tried a lot of those same dribble moves he tried on Rudy Gobert, and Al Horford has been able to stay with him, stay agile. It's been a huge, huge part of what's made the Celtics team look so dominant in these playoffs so far, especially against the Mavericks. But what we saw in Game 4, and what we saw really in what we saw in Game 4 in the back half of game, and right before Luka fouled out in Game 3, right, when the Mavericks were playing better basketball than them, they were playing with high intensity, with high energy, and this is what they need to do. The Celtics play fast, and I think the Mavericks are finally figuring that out, right? The Mavericks like to play a little bit slower. They like to play, their speed of basketball, but the Celtics aren't going to let them do that. And I know the Celtics made a lot of mistakes in Game 4. They didn't play their brand of basketball. They didn't play smart basketball, which is another factor in why they lost. This isn't all on the Mavericks. A lot of it is on the way that the Celtics played, and I want to see how the Celtics respond here in Game 5. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how and if they do respond to the way that they played in Game 4 in Dallas. But going back home, playing against your home fans, we saw how much Kyrie struggled on the road, right? And Kyrie has been a huge part of these last two games for the Mavericks. Game 3, even though they lost, he was the one keeping them in it. It wasn't a great Luka game. He was the one that was able to keep them in it. Despite Luka fouling out at the end, he still was able to keep them in it and keep it competitive. In Game 4, he and Luka both had great games, but, really this Mavericks team kind of goes as he does. And I know that's a lot of pressure to put on Kyrie Irving, who is the number 2 option. But when you're playing like the Mavericks are, you expect Luka to go off, right? You expect Luka to score 30, 40 points maybe, have himself a nice game offensively and do whatever he does on the defensive end. But the rest of that, to keep pace with the Celtics, they need Kyrie Irving to drop 20 points minimum, right? They need 50 points combined out of their 2 stars, and Kyrie needs to score 20 for them to stay competitive. The role players need to step up. We saw a lot of them step up. Derek Lively hit his first career 3. I know he's not a 3-point guy. You're not going to rely on him to hit 3s, but he played a great game in Game 4. Daniel Gafford didn't fill up the stat sheet quite as much as some of these other guys, but he played a great game. Really, the entirety of the reserves showed up for the Mavericks, and this is the way that we know the Mavericks can play basketball. This is how they got here. This is what they do. This is what they need to continue to do, and I want to see them keep that energy up, because that energy is what is going to make this a fun, competitive series. That is all I'm hoping for in Game 5 tonight. That being said, Game 5 back in the Garden. I'm going to give a little bit of a prediction here. Looking at the odds, obviously the way that the Celtics have been playing, one hiccup isn't going to be, the one hiccup isn't going to be the end of it, right? That's not going to be the end of their season. They're probably not going to end this. But I am a little concerned of how they're going to bounce back. The Celtics, for the one thing that they've struggled with all season long, has been closing games out. Right now, the game, Boston is heavily favored. They have a minus 265 in the sports book right now. That is a huge, huge favorite. And do I really disagree with that? No. I don't really disagree with that. I think that's about on point for what we should and might be able to expect for tonight's game in the Garden. Like I said, Kyrie hasn't been able to play great in Boston far, and unless he's able to be that Kyrie expect him to be the he was in Dallas, the Mavs stand no chance. I'm going to take the game just because, all the energy. They need to play basically a perfect game to beat the Celtics, and the Celtics need to have their own kind of mess ups to lose these games. I do think this is going to be a much closer game, one of those kind of down to the wire Game 3 kind of endings, where, the Mavericks aren't going to have to claw back from a huge deficit, hopefully. I really do think that this Mavericks team is a team that, if they got going earlier in this series, could have made this a 7-game series. I really do believe that. But they got going way too late. Those first 2 games in Boston just sapped all the energy out of them, and they weren't able to respond quick enough in Dallas. And with Luka fouling out, that really killed them. I am taking Boston to win this game. I don't know if I'm going to take them with the points. It's 6.5 point spread, but I am taking Boston to win this game. I do think this will be a close game. But yeah, in our next segment coming up, we are going to finish up our NBA coverage for the day. We're going to talk a little bit more about the NBA Finals MVP, because it's been an interesting series, right? There's no clear Finals MVP frontrunner. So we're going to talk a little bit about who I think should win Finals MVP, some of the candidates as the betting lines have them, and why they are in consideration. So stick around for that. We will be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around, I feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I'm in this shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Keep my way in the beat put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. I want that shit that I'm getting right now. I'm losing it to lose the fix. I'm losing shit and stupid me. If you choose to live or choose to take, you choose to fight and lose a grip and lose a gift. Oh.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking all about Game 4 for the NBA Finals. We also did a quick little preview of Game 5, where I said the Mavericks were going to lose in a tight one, and the Celtics would raise their 18th Larry O'Brien trophy to set a new league mark. Very exciting. But speaking of raising that trophy, we have to talk a little bit about the Finals MVP. There are a lot of different options for the way that this could go here in this series. There's no clear number one. We'll take a look down the betting favorite list for the Finals MVP for this series, and we'll talk about whether or not they deserve to be in there, who I think is going to win the Finals MVP, and where this series is looking at for a future perspective. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comment section. I will go ahead and talk about that as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying here today, we are going to finish up our basketball coverage for the day here, talking a little bit about the NBA Finals MVP odds. It's been a very interesting final series as far as individual players go, right? Usually at this point in the finals, you kind of have a general idea of who is going to win the finals MVP or who is a front runner to win the finals MVP. But if you talk in this series about who deserves it and who is going to win it, you might get a consensus answer. But you're going to get a lot of answers from all over the place of who deserves it, who was the best player in these finals. There was no true, at least for me looking at it, there's no obvious true number one guy, at least for the Celtics, right? Because the Celtics like to play team basketball, and that makes this award pretty hard to give out. Now, if the Mavericks find a way to win this series, it's going to Luka, right? And I know there's some theories over there that say, hey, Luka should win it either way, and that kind of died down after Game 3 when he played horrendously defensively. But, either way, even with that blemish on him, there shouldn't be giving the MVP of the finals to someone that loses, especially in a 4-game, 5-game series. Now, do I understand it in a 7-game series that maybe comes down to an overtime Game 7 or a buzzer beater Game 7 and all these games are close? Yeah, maybe I do understand that. But this is not that kind of close series where we should even consider giving it to somebody on the other team. That being said, going through the top 5 or top 6 for odds to win Finals MVP right now, according to Sports Illustrated betting odds, at the bottom at number 6 right now, they have Kyrie Irving, and I just kind of disqualified him at number 6 just because Despite how well he's been playing in these last two games, he was awful in the first two games. Horrendous the first two games. And he was probably the reason. I mean, he's not the whole reason, but he was a huge reason why the Mavericks weren't winning those first two games in Boston. He was so inefficient with the ball. He was super inefficient, offensively, and didn't support Luka, who needed that support, especially in game two, which I do think they definitely could have won. That was a game where Boston was shooting terribly. If he had put up more than 15 points, if he had put up 25 points, they probably win that game. If he shoots a little more effectively from the field, they probably win that game. And we're having a much different discussion right now. It's 2-2 heading back to Boston instead of 3-1, right? And that makes this series look very different. But Kyrie is off the board not only because he struggled at the beginning, but because he is on the losing team right now. And then we get to, I guess, what we might call our first real option, Derek White at number 5. And Derek White is at a plus 10,000 odds, and he's probably not going to win it. He's played solid. I know last game he didn't have his great game, but his greatest game, but nobody on the Celtics really did. Derek White has been a nice little piece to keep them alive. He's hit a bunch of clutch shots, especially down there in game 3. I believe he hit a shot to stop the run when the Mavericks were on their 20-point comeback trail there to help put the game away. He's hit a lot of clutch shots in this series, but he hasn't quite lived up to that kind of expectation that you have for a finals MVP player. Next on the list, and this is where we start to get to guys that you might say, maybe they do deserve it. At number 4 is Jrue Holiday. And after game 2, people were saying Jrue Holiday does deserve it. He was at the top of a lot of people's boards. And now Jrue Holiday isn't the kind of guy that's going to continue to go out there and wow you with his offensive play. His defense has been great this entire series, as it always is, but he's not filling up the stat sheet offensively. He's not dropping those 30-point games. He's not taking 25 shots a game. He's not the guy that's going to do that. That's just not his role in the offense, which is why he's down here at number 4 as the option. But Jrue Holiday's a guy that I do believe should get a little bit of a good, legitimate, small amount of buzz for the Finals MVP, especially if he has a nice Game 5 here, right? And I think that's really what this comes down to. Assuming that the Celtics win Game 5 here, close out the series in Boston, whichever Boston player I think plays better tonight, if they win, is probably going home with that Finals MVP trophy. It's that kind of close of a race. But Jrue Holiday, unless he goes out and he is the guy tonight, I don't think he will win it. But he should deserve to have a little bit of buzz. At number 3 on this list right now is Luka Doncic. And Luka Doncic is a plus 1,100. So, I mean, I've already had this conversation at the beginning. I don't think a losing team's player should get the MVP. I do understand why people say it might be Luka, because if you're taking everything out of consideration, every context out of consideration, Luka Doncic is the best player in these finals, right? But that's not how this works. He hasn't been able to raise his team to victory on his own. And he needs a little bit of help. I don't blame him for that. He needs a little bit of help, but you can't be the most valuable player if you aren't the one that is propelling your team to victory. And that's just my position on it. I don't think Luka Doncic doesn't deserve it. I think objectively he's been the best player. But no, you can't give it to a team that loses this badly in the finals if they are to lose tonight. Even if they are to lose at all, I just can't really justify giving it to the losing team's player. And then we get to the real question between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And right now, Jaylen Brown is the favorite at minus 235. Jason Tatum is at plus 255. Jason Tatum had a nice little game 3. He had one really nice game. But outside of that, he's been his typical Jason Tatum. He shot 35% from the field in his finals career. So through the 2 finals he's been, and that includes this one. I know that's going back a little far and not just talking about this, but that is like the worst, I believe, of qualifying players from the field, which is kind of insane. He has not been performing the way that Boston expects him to perform. Obviously not needs, because they've been winning games, and a lot of that comes down to how great of a team they are, how great of team chemistry they have together. But right now, Jaylen Brown is the favorite, and I think that for good reason. But I do want to throw one more name into the ring: Kristaps Porzingis. And this is contingent on Kristaps playing tonight. But there is a noticeable difference when Kristaps Porzingis is on the court and when Kristaps Porzingis is off the court of how effective the Mavericks are. We want to talk about how different they were on the road and at home, and as much as that might make a difference, those are also the trends with Kristaps playing. Now, Porzingis is still questionable for tonight. We don't know if he's playing or not. If he plays tonight, and I know people might disagree with this because Kristaps Porzingis has missed 2 games, but if he plays tonight, and he is that same kind of defensive force, offensive weapon that he has been in the first 2 games that he plays, and that noticeable defensive difference that we saw in games 3 and game 4, if Kristaps Porzingis is able to go out there and make that impact, I truly think that Kristaps should win Finals MVP. And I know that might sound a little bit crazy, again, because injuries are something that matter, and I know that's something that people take into consideration. But Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have both struggled from the field at times. They've both not been super effective, and between the two, I think Jaylen Brown, I mean, most people say Jaylen Brown has been the better player. He's been much more effective. We've talked about Jason Tatum's struggles from the field in the finals, not just this year, but in the last finals against the Warriors that he competed in. You know, this is a really interesting NBA Finals debate, right? But for the MVP, because so many players can win it, because there hasn't been that one guy that's just taken over for the Celtics. And I would argue that the guy that has done it the most effectively has been the most valuable, most impactful player for the Celtics when he's on the court, has been Kristaps Porzingis. Now, like I said, injuries do play a big role in this. And he's not in the top 6 because of injuries. I do very much understand that. But he still has my vote for Finals MVP if he plays tonight. Questionable. I'm not sure if he's going to play again. They called that leg injury serious, and he has been going through a lot of injuries in this playoffs. He's missed a lot of the playoffs, but this isn't a playoffs MVP. This is a Finals MVP award. So I do believe that Kristaps Porzingis should win this award. Will he? Probably not. It's probably going to go to Jaylen Brown if the trends continue. Again, I'm going off the theory that the Celtics win tonight. And if I'm doing that, really what this comes down to, since it's such a tight race, is who plays better tonight. And that's probably going to be the one that wins and raises that Finals MVP trophy. But I do think it should be Kristaps Porzingis. I just think he's been the most impactful player on the Celtics today in this series. But anyway, in the next segment, we are going to move off of basketball as Game 5 is tonight in almost exactly 3 hours. So get excited for that. We'll talk about more basketball tomorrow, regardless of what happens. We're going to move into the world of hockey. We're going to talk a little bit about Game 4 between the Oilers and the Panthers. A wild game. Nothing like I think anybody could have expected out of that game. We will talk a little bit about that coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking all about the NBA and the NBA Finals. We talked about Game 4, the crazy, huge victory for the Mavericks as they take the third biggest win in NBA Finals history, a 38-point walloping of the Boston Celtics. Hand them their first loss of the NBA Finals, and their first loss on the road in the playoffs so far. As the series heads back to Boston tonight for Game 5. We also talked about the odds for Finals MVP and what that race is looking like right now. We are we are done with our NBA talk for the day, though, as we are moving on to the NHL. We're going to talk about an equally crazy Game 4 between the Panthers and the Oilers that happened over the weekend and what we're looking at for the future of that series. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around and talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to move into the the NHL. Sorry about that. The Oilers similarly rout the Panthers, just like the Mavericks did to the Celtics. There's a lot of similarities between these two series, really, from the setup between them to the, way that these games have kind of played out. The difference in these two series are, I mean, if you look at the Oilers, the way that they've played these games, you can make a good argument that in the 12 periods of hockey that have been played between the Oilers and the Panthers, the Oilers have won 8 of them. 8 of 12, and they're down 3-1. They were in danger of being swept, but that didn't happen. In Game 4, what happened was insane. The Panthers, the best defense in the league, the best goalie, still alive, Sergei Bobrovsky, who's been on this incredible hot streak, goes up to Edmonton, gives up 8 goals. He gives up 5 and 16 shots, gets pulled in the second period, as the Florida Panthers give up 8 goals. They lose 8-1. A crazy, crazy game. Nothing like anybody, I think, in the hockey world was ever expecting. But this is what we see out of the Oilers. This is what is possible with a team that is so high-powered offensively. And it didn't really come from all the guys you expect. Holloway had a couple goals. McDavid had 3 assists. He only had 1 goal. Draisaitl had 2 points, 2 assists here. Those were his first points of the series. They were finally able to break through, and it was from all over the lineup. Darnell Nurse had his first goal of the postseason. People were kind of dogging on him for the way he's been playing this postseason. He comes out, scores a goal, is huge for the Oilers in this game. This is what happens when everything goes right for the Oilers. You see that offensive potential. Stuart Skinner is playing great hockey right now, and while the Panthers kind of just played really sloppy that entire game. That was my biggest takeaway from that game. They were playing sloppy. They took a lot of penalties. They went on a 5-on-3 at one point. That was the one goal that they gave up on the power play. The Oilers were 1 for 6 on the power play, and that was on that 2-man advantage. But this Oilers team, this is why they're here. This is why this Oilers team has made it to the finals. They were able to flash that talent, that ability to come back and win these games when their back is against the wall. You go back throughout the entire playoffs. I mean, they haven't faced a 3-0 deficit ever, but in elimination games, they haven't lost yet, right? They were down 3-2 against the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks team that looked like they were primed and ready to move on. Then They come back, they win those last two games, something that only happens 20% of the time. They come back from down 3-2 after some back-breaking losses. They're able to fight back. A couple goalie changes happen. That's when they reintroduce to Stuart Skinner back into the crease after Pickard won one and lost one. But it's a tough road to come back. There's a reason that it's only been done one time in finals history. There's a reason that it's only been done four times in the history of hockey. And I know that's a lot. That's a lot more than in basketball, but you know, it hasn't happened since 1942 in the finals when the Maple Leafs came back and beat Detroit. Right? That's when there were like 10 teams in the NHL. So they're looking to chase history, and this series feels far from over. It has a much different feel than the NBA series. Because like I was saying, if you're going through and you're watching every single minute of of these games, you're looking at these games and you're saying, go through game one. The Oilers lose that 3-0. The Oilers won probably all three of those periods, quite if I'm being honest with you. I mean, you could make the argument for maybe one or two of those periods to go towards the Panthers, but if I'm scoring this like boxing, I'm giving them a point, right? For all three of those periods. And Sergei Bobrovsky did his job. Sergei Bobrovsky stole game one. And that is what you can expect out of a goalie like Sergei Bobrovsky. That's part of the challenge of playing a team like the Panthers. You can't expect to just play better hockey and win the game because they have that guy. They have that guy that can just shut you down regardless of what you do, right? And that is so tough to go up against. But they've clearly made some changes that worked here in game 4 here. They score 8 goals. And 8 goals is not only an insane number to think about, it's the most goals not only given up in the playoffs this year, but the most goals given up by the Panthers all season long. The Panthers have never given up that many goals this entire season, and they give it up in a closeout game in the Stanley Cup Finals. This Oilers team is serious offensively, and we know that. Everybody watching this knows that, right? That is a huge part of how they are able of how they were able to get themselves here. And it's something that we love watching about this Oilers team. That takes a lot of energy, and they've been playing again. Energy. That is the key word when we're talking about a team that is down 3-0 trying to make this comeback. Because at times when you're down like that, it might feel hopeless. It might feel awful. It might feel like, oh, we're just going through the motions. We're done. We had a great season, but we're done. And you never want to get trapped in that headspace. That is how you get blown out, right? That's how you get complacent. And I think that's happened to both the Celtics and to the Panthers. And I think hopefully this is a big wake. I think this is probably going to be a big wake-up call for them. Now, the Oilers did make some changes, right? They shifted some lines around. They put McDavid and Draisaitl together with some new pairings, and that worked awesome. And I think that we were talking about this in the production meeting. Garrison, the host of the Hockey and Golf podcast, brought up that the Oilers have never, after losing 3 in a row this season, have always gone on win streaks of at least 5 games, right? After they lost 3 in a row, they went on that huge win streak that I keep bringing up, where they won, I believe, almost a record-breaking 16 straight games back in December into January. That is when Stuart Skinner was playing the way he is right now. You were going through that. They were giving up. They only given up more than 3 goals twice in that 16-game span. That is great goalie playing, and that's part of it as well, right? This is keeping them in the game. This is keeping them invested in the series, and I still feel like this team believes. I feel like I was saying, they were playing better hockey. They just weren't able to get pucks past Bobrovsky, and they figured something out. They got 5 pucks past Bobrovsky in 16 shots. In 2 periods, they scored 8 goals against this stout Panthers defense. Now, the Panthers are going to make adjustments, right? You can't expect them to come back after an 8-goal game and not make adjustments. But I think this is a series. And I know that I discounted the Oilers. I kind of called this series over. But that's because the Oilers hadn't been able to get anything past Bobrovsky, even in the periods they were winning. Like before this game, I counted 5-4 in periods. In the 9 periods through 3 games, I counted that it was 5-4 Oilers. Now it's 8-4 Oilers, right? That is a huge lead in period points. Now, period points is a metric that I have made up that means nothing. It means literally nothing to anybody. But it's just a way that I like to visualize these hockey games, because hockey is a sport where the best team doesn't always win because goaltending is a thing, right? And that kind of personal metric that I put on this series is, it's purely subjective. Again, there's no data that backs up these period points that I'm putting in here, but it shows how good Sergei Bobrovsky has been. It shows how good this Panthers defense has been, but they cracked the code. The Oilers did. They found a way past the netminder, and if they can continue, again, they don't need to score 8 goals every night, but this showed everybody that they're not here to they're not here to play. They're here to win. They're here to play hard, and if they smell blood, they are going to attack. And this is going to be a fun game. I'm very excited. I really do think that the Oilers have a legitimate shot of coming back from 3-0. We almost saw it earlier this postseason when the Rangers almost gave up a 3-0 lead to the Carolina Hurricanes, right? This Oilers team is a team that plays hard and does not give up. And that is a huge important trait to have when you are going in a series that is really not going your way. But I do believe in this team. I think that if there is a team that can do it, it's a team with offensive firepower, and nobody else has more offensive firepower than the Oilers, right? The Edmonton Oilers here head back to Sunrise, Florida, take on the Panthers in Game 5 tomorrow. I'm very excited to see what happens. We'll break down Game 5 a little bit, I think, tomorrow if we have time, but if we don't, I'm going to give you a prediction now. I think the Oilers take Game 5 in overtime. Not super high scoring. 3-2, 4-3, something like that. And I do think that this series makes it back to Edmonton for Game 6. So I'm excited for that. We'll see what happens in the rest of this series, but we are going to move into the world of baseball for the rest of our show. We're going to start off our baseball talk a little bit about the wild card races, kind of some looking at the MLB standings a little bit, taking a look at how many teams are kind of clinched up in that middle, bunched up together there, especially in the NL wild card race. And we'll talk about all that, where we're looking at here as we race towards the midway point of the MLB season. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, the 8-1 rout that the Oilers put on the Florida Panthers as they force a Game 5 in Sunrise, Florida tomorrow. We also talked about the NBA Finals. We talked about the Mavericks' own rout of the Boston Celtics that forced a Game 5 tonight in Boston. We talked about predictions for that. I picked the Boston Celtics to close out the series there. And we also talked about the NBA Finals. Who is favored to win it? Who I think should win it? And the way that this series is interesting in the NBA Finals compared to a lot of other years. We are going to finish off our show today here talking about some baseball. So we're going to talk about 2 different baseball stories, starting off with something that is very interesting to me, the the standings right now. And I know standings are kind of boring, but stick around with me here just a little bit, because this is a really weird part of baseball right now. They just added a third wild card, and in the NL specifically, there are 7 teams that are within 1.5 games of that third wild card spot. So we'll talk about what that race might play out at as we reach the halfway point really soon here in the MLB season. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some baseball coverage here. Very excited. I'm going to talk a little bit about the NL wildcard race. And I did a little bit in that intro right there of a preview for you of where we're going to go. But if you look at where we are in the NL wildcard race specifically, and really all over the MLB, it is insanely close. There are, I believe, 14 teams that are within 3 games of each other in the AL and NL, between 31 and 35 wins. That kind of range right there. There's like 14 teams that are right in that range. But if we go to the wild card right now, and we talk from wild card 2, the Braves in the NL have wild card 1. They're 4 games up on the on wild card 3, right? But the St. Louis Cardinals are at wild card 2 right now. They are half a game up on wild card 3. Wild card 3, there's a tie between the Padres and the Washington Nationals, which is insane. Nobody would have guessed that the Nationals, halfway through the season, at 35 and 36, are in the race for the NL wildcard, in the race for the playoffs. That is 3 teams within half a game. The Arizona Diamondbacks and the San Francisco Giants are half a game back of the Nationals and the Padres. That is 5 teams within 1 game, right? Then we get the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Cincinnati Reds, which are 1 game back of the third wild card, half a game back of the previous, and 1.5 back of that second wild card. That is 7 teams. And you know what? We can go one step further. The Chicago Cubs and the New York Mets are 1.5 game back of the Nats and the Padres, 2 games back of the Cardinals. That is 9 teams. 9 teams that are battling for 2 spots that are all within 2 games of each other. That is going to be a super fun race as we get down the stretch of the season. And like I said, this is not like we're in the beginning of the season. We are almost halfway through the year right now. We're right around game 72 for these teams, so we are racing towards halfway point. Halfway point is 81. We are almost there. Halfway point is in our sights, and there are 9 teams. 9. That is almost all of the fingers I have that are right on the cusp of the playoffs in the NL. And that is the way that really the entirety of baseball has been. You know, outside of those 9 teams, there are only 2 teams in the NL that are all but eliminated from playoff contention. You know, that being the Rockies and the Marlins. And if we go look at the AL, well, it's not quite as close. You know, outside of the bottom 3 teams, every single team in the AL has a chance of making those wild card. We'll walk through that. The Angels, the Angels, the A's, and the White Sox are all but out at this point. Houston, Texas, and Tampa are 6 to 7 games back, while Boston, Toronto, and Detroit are 3 to 5 games back, right? There are lots of tight races as we continue, and this is the way the MLB has been. Really, is a really interesting kind of way that the MLB has been this season, because you have a clear bottom 5 teams, right? You have a clear Colorado, Miami, Chicago, White Sox, Oakland and Los Angeles Angels at the bottom, and you have a top. You have a clear top tier of teams with the Orioles, the Yankees, the Phillies, and the Guardians. These are clear top teams. You can throw the Royals in there if you want, but every other team, right? That's all but like 10 teams are in this middle pack, and really anything can happen. It is going to be a wild race for these wild cards, especially wild cards 2 and 3 in both of these conferences. But getting back to the NL, because I think it's going to be a little more of a crapshoot there. We're already seeing a little bit of separation there in the AL. You have teams that kind of have no business being in this mix. I already talked about the Washington Nationals. They are tied for that third wild card right now with the San Diego Padres. The Nationals have no business being up there. They have punted on this year, basically. They've given up on everything that they're trying to do this season. They are not, really competing that hard this season. This is not something that they said, all right, you know what, we're in it. We're going for it. They have the number one prospect in baseball on a bunch of people's rankings, James Wood, ready to come up. If they were serious about making a playoff run, he would have been up at the beginning of this season. Their pitching staff, they've called up a lot of guys. I've got a little bit more information here as a Nats fan, following them a little closer than a lot of other teams. But DJ Hurst just comes out, throws 13 strikeouts in 6 innings. Not just in 6 innings, but he does it in 84 pitches. That is insane efficiency out of a guy who, that's just his third start ever in the big leagues. Mitchell Parker, we talked a little bit about him at the beginning of the season. He came up in the second week of the season. He has not given up more than 3 runs in any start so far this season. He has been great. Trevor Williams goes on the IL. He's having a career year. Mackenzie Gore, for the Washington Nationals, the guys who are supposed to be the ace, has been number 4 for this team, right? And he's been great. Jake Irvin has been great for this team. That pitching staff has been incredible for the Washington Nationals. And these teams that they're competing with, Arizona, they were in the World Series last season. Cincinnati has this huge upswell of young talent coming through their system right now, led by Elly De La Cruz. Pittsburgh has Paul Skeens. Chicago is kind of in a weird spot where they were starting really good and kind of have been on a schneid lately. The Mets have won 5 straight now. The Padres, Tatis is on a tear. They have this lineup that on paper should be among the best. And the Cardinals also started slow. They have been one of the better teams in these last couple months of baseball. The amount of parity that's going on in the NL and the amount of shakeup, if it stays this close, it's going to be insane scenarios as we get down to the last month of the season. Now, it's still pre-All-Star game, so it's tough, but you're starting to see these standings take form, and there's so many teams, especially in the NL, that are so close to that wildcard spot. The trade deadline is going to be messy. A lot of these teams are teams that are supposed to trade guys. Again, Nationals, Mets, they're supposed to be sellers at the deadline right now, but they're so close to the playoffs. Are they going to be sellers? Are they going to sell off all their best assets? They're so close. Maybe they reload next year and make a run at it. What's going to happen in the AL? What is the deadline going to look like? These are the kind of dominoes that are starting to take shape right now, starting to fall as we get closer and closer to the deadline, just about a month away. It's going to be a very interesting, and I think this is going to be a very tight deadline. And what I mean by that is there's not going to be any big trade. There's not going to be there's not going to be a huge move, because all of these teams are kind of grouped together, and some of them that are grouped here are probably going to sell. I expect the Nats to sell a little bit, but still, it's going to be a really interesting trade deadline, and we'll keep an eye on all of this as we get closer to the deadline, as we get closer to the All-Star break. But it's just going to be really interesting. 9 teams within 2 games of the second wild card, all together. That is insane. It's going to be a lot of fun. Baseball's going to be a lot of fun this summer, and we're going to start to shift our focus a little more towards baseball as the show starts to hit the dog days of summer, and NBA and NHL and their finals and playoffs. But excited for more of that. We are going to finish off our show today with some more baseball. Talk a little bit about the Dodgers. They had a rough weekend. They lost two big stars. They won a couple games, but they lost two big stars. We'll talk about who they were, what that means for the future of this organization, not just for this year, but for next year, and what the timetable is looking like on those guys to return. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the craziness that is the MLB standings right now, with 9 teams in the NL wildcard race grouped together for these last final 2 spots, and you might even be able to throw the Braves in there, who are only 3.5 games above those 9 teams who are within 2 games of each other. It's very, very tight in the NL. It's going to be an exciting race down the stretch. In this segment, we're going to finish off our show with some Dodger talk about some of their injuries. But if you're just tuning in, we also talked about the NHL. They had a crazy game 4 with the Oilers winning 8-1. That's the most goals that the Panthers have given up all season, not just in the playoffs, all season. Game 5 is tomorrow. We talked about the NBA Finals with Game 5 tonight. I picked the Mavericks to lose that game. It's going to be a tight one, hopefully. I'm very excited for that game tonight. We also talked about Finals MVP odds. But like I was saying, in this segment, we're going to finish off our show talking about the weekend that the Dodgers had. The Dodgers have had a very interesting weekend, right? They lost 2 huge pieces to their lineup. MVP, potential Rookie of the Year winner, Yoshi Yamamoto, and former MVP, maybe this year's MVP as well, Mookie Betts. We'll talk about that and everything surrounding the Dodgers that happened this weekend in just a second. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comment section. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful, Monday afternoon. Lost my day there for a second. Once again, that link is GSMCPodcast.net. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today talking about the Dodgers. The Dodgers lost 2 key pieces last night. First of all, they lost a $300 million man that they signed out of Japan this season in Yoshi Yamamoto. He is going on the IL with an arm injury. 15-day IL. We don't know how bad it is. It doesn't sound too awful, but that is a huge loss for a team that's already kind of thin on pitching. You know, they don't have Clayton Kershaw right now. They're dealing with some more injuries to their starters. He's been really good. 3 ERA this season. Coming from Japan, he's been not quite as great as advertised, but it's tough to make that transition. And after a couple tough starts to begin, he has been a huge part of that rotation, slotting in right behind Tyler Glasnow, who has been an ace, who's been tremendous, by the way, for the Dodgers. A huge get for them this offseason, something that has really propelled them forward so far this year. The other loss, and arguably the bigger loss, and I say arguably because for any other team it would have been, but Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts is out for undisclosed amount of time. It said he got hit with a pitch last night right on the hand. And it fractured his hand, fractured his left hand. He is out. I hadn't seen what IL they put him on. I assume 60-day IL. They have not. They said it didn't require surgery, so he's just going to need time to heal that up. And a broken hand doesn't heal quickly. A broken hand takes a good amount of time. Or a fractured hand. For how long does it take for a fractured hand to heal? It's not a short amount of time, right? Mookie Betts, it's going to take 3 to 8 weeks depending on the break, and it's not going to require surgery. So it's an interesting situation because while the Dodgers are a perennial contender, a team that's going to win 100+ games this season with or without Mookie Betts, having him at that top of the order is huge, right? He's a huge run producer. He has been huge for them all season long. You have Shohei Ohtani, you have Freddie Freeman, but just because you have those other two MVPs at the top of your lineup doesn't mean it doesn't suck to lose your third MVP, a guy who has arguably been more valuable for them all season long. Mookie Betts has been a huge loss for them. He's been playing shortstop, even though, not a shortstop. Mookie Betts, he officially went on the IL about an hour ago. There we go. He got hit on the hand, 97-mile-per-hour pitch. They don't know how long it's going to take to heal. He's hitting 300 this season. Not too many players are hitting 300 this year. He's 40 RBIs in 72 games. And it's going to be tough. They don't really have another shortstop to replace him. They've got Miguel Rojas, but that's going to add to a bottom of the lineup that's already been struggling. It's been pushing them down all the way to number 4. Oh my God, number 4 in my power rankings. But that's kind of low for a team with this kind of expectation. That's kind of low for a team that's expecting to win a World Series every single year. It's World Series or bust for them, but it is a little bit of it is a big setback. They don't know how long it's going to be. Probably takes about a month or two, and they'll be fine. Like I said, they're going to make the playoffs. The Padres are kind of on their tail in the AL, not AL, the NL East or West, They're 8 games back, but the Dodgers I'm not too concerned about. They've just made a trade trying to get a little more offense in their system, but these are two key losses that they've suffered this season, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a quick, easy fix for them to just get over. We'll see how they're able to come back. I think the Dodgers will be just fine, but it is a tough look for the Dodgers, and I hope Mookie Betts comes back soon. I hope Yoshi Yamamoto comes back soon, because these are two of the most electric players in all of the MLB. These are two players that are worth the price of admission on their own, let alone the other names in the Dodger lineup. So hopefully they come back soon. I wish them a full and fast recovery, but this is definitely going to hurt the Dodgers. This is definitely going to drop them a little bit in our power rankings. That'll come out on Friday, and we'll see how they are without them. Like I said, they'll be just fine. They still have Freddie Freeman. They still have Shohei Ohtani. So the bats will be just fine, but that's a huge piece of offense that they're losing for a team that already was kind of struggling a little bit more than they should have on the offensive end. So we will see how they are able to recover. But anyway, Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Tomorrow, we will be back with more NBA coverage as Game 5 is tonight, just about 2.5 hours from now. We'll talk about everything that happens, whether or not the Celtics raise the Larry O'Brien trophy tonight. We will see. I've got this. I think they're going to do it, but we will see. Again, you have been listening to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. You guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I pull up, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.